turn to Exodus chapter 2. Am I on, Tony? Yeah, I think so. There's a little fill in the blank things in your bulletin if you want to follow along. John picks the picture on the front of our bulletin every week, and this one's especially appropriate. You'll see why in a little while. Exodus chapter 2. Most of this chapter is where did Moses come from? How did he get here? That's the majority of it. And then the second part of the chapter deals with Israel's plight. It's a pretty quick summary. So that's the two sections of our message this morning. It has a lot of historical background to it. And then there's some precepts and concepts I want to bring out of this text that kind of apply to us in a variety of different ways. So Exodus chapter 2. I'm just going to read the first 7 verses, and I'm not going to stand up and read the whole thing, but I'll walk through it as we go along. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." And his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" We'll stop there. We learn from the book of Exodus. Can you turn this on, Tony? Nothing's going on here. We learn from the book of Exodus that Moses turns out to be the baby of the family. His sister Miriam, she's the oldest, and there's a few stories about her that say, she's acting like the oldest. She has some issues. And it turns out that Aaron is 3 years older than Moses. He turns out to be the lead high priest in the Aaronic priesthood. So God has a plan for this whole family. They come from Levites, and Moses is going to be the most used person by God. He does that, sometimes. He just likes to snag people from this family, from that family. How many of you have ever heard of Billy Sunday? Anybody? Yeah. I was working in one of my mother-in-law's rentals one time, many years ago in Laguna Beach, California. And I walk into this rental, and you could smell the pot in there. And I had to repair something in the bathroom. And on the wall of this guy's dresser in this kind of efficiency apartment was a giant picture of Billy Sunday. Thinking, what? And during the course of that hour and a half out there or so, I said, by the way, do you know who that guy is on the wall? He goes, yeah, that's my great-grandpa. There's no guarantee that Billy Sunday's kids are all serving God and taking care of the kingdom, etc. So everybody makes their own choices. Everybody walks in their own directions. So it's just one of those things. And God steps down, tells us a brief little story about Moses' family of origin. We learn later on that Moses' mother's name was Jochebed, and his dad's name was Aaron. But who are they? We don't know. We're not even actually sure about that. We think that's the correct parents for this guy. But anyways, so Moses is the critical piece of this story from verses 1 through 22. And we're going to talk about the rearing of Moses in verses 1 through 10. Look at verse 8. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go So the girl went and called the child's mother, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of the water." A couple of things. First of all, this story reminds me that God has a serious plan for all women, especially moms, for sure. And nobody arrived here without mom. They're important to the mix of things. They served God, and God's purposes were served. That's an important thing to think about. They served God's purposes. Now, what did we learn last week? The Hebrew midwives served God, and they served God's purposes. God's purposes are served by how we serve God. That's an important thing to remember. It turns out that very likely Aaron was saved by his own mother because the midwives refused to kill the baby boys. Now she comes to Moses, and the edict from Pharaoh was drown all the Hebrew boys in the river. His mother says, "Oh, we're not doing that either." So these women play a significant role in this whole story at the front end. The hand that rocks the cradle rules the world, as they say. I want to take a look at a couple of observations or applications from the story right here. First of all, the women that God used for this purpose is Moses' mother, Moses' sister, Pharaoh's daughter's attendants. Every last one of them has a little tiny piece to play in the story right here. Now, probably his mother would say, "Well, I played a piece for 10 months, etc., and I took care of this guy, and I nursed him." But everybody plays a piece in the story. And God's not asking us to do the whole story. He's just asking us to take our part in this grand story. Is it possible, and this is just me speculating, is it possible that 25 years from now, when none of us are here, that somebody in this neighborhood goes, "I remember when Living Hope had that cookout on 4th of July, we used to go to it every year. That's where I met someone who really knew the Lord." I don't know what our piece is going to play in that whole role, but let's ask God to play a piece in the role of people's lives around this neck of the neighborhood, for as long as we're going to be here. So I'm looking forward to that event, by the way. We sent out almost 2,500 flyers yesterday. They dropped in the mailboxes yesterday. So 2,500 people who live within a half-mile radius here, 3 mail routes got a flyer in their box. Oh, that's right. I remember that. That's what that sign is over by that church. So we'll see what happens, what God does. We're hoping for 100 people. We're giving away sparklers to 100 kids. See what happens. The second thing that comes in here, obeying God is always the best decision no matter how dire the circumstances. His mother says, "You're not killing my baby, and I'm not killing my baby. We're going to put him on the river in a little ark of boat, a little ark type thing." The actual Hebrew word is the exact same word that God told Noah, "Build me an ark." It's kind of an interesting repetition of the story. We're going to redeem mankind. We're going to redeem with an ark, and we're going to redeem your people by starting with the deliverer floating down the river in an ark. That's the actual Hebrew word that comes through the text. It's a pretty interesting little reminder. I think God picked that word on purpose. The third thing that comes to mind, God's plans are well aware of those things that we have to escape. Every once in a while, in my prayer life, I think, I should thank God for what I've managed to escape. I've never been in any serious accident, ever. Not even close. A little fender bender here, whatever. I could be killed on my way home today, but be that as it may. I've never been in a bad accident. I've never fallen 25 feet and smashed my head or whatever else. I've never been, I had a partially broken left ankle one time, but it wasn't anything serious. I played volleyball with it. But I have managed to escape some pretty interesting things in my life. We have all managed to escape. And there's a host of things I don't even know about. Maybe I was only 5 seconds from a bad accident, I just didn't realize it. And Moses writes this down because he wants us to know what he escaped. by the hands of God. He stepped in a miraculous way with a series of events which created his life, opened his life to possibilities. Now he doesn't get to grow up with his mom and dad. He ends up growing up with Pharaoh and his host of people in the palace, but that doesn't matter that much. He managed to escape stuff, and it says in Genesis chapter 1, the exact same words that are in this text right here, and his mother looked at him and said, this is really a fine, good-looking baby. Those words mean that God always has a plan. And God created this, and he said it was good. When he created Adam, this is very good. That's what that's what Moses' mother is saying about her son. She doesn't realize she's prophesying the future for this young man is good. It's absolutely divinely ordered. I would submit to you that whether your mother said those words over you or not, that's true about you as well. Whatever future God has for you, it's yours uniquely, and it is a fine plan. If your parent has never said to you, I could not be prouder of how you turned out, they should have. One more. Hebrew children were often nursed until they were 3 years old. I found that and think, oh, really? So, little Moses probably stayed with his mom. We don't know this for sure. But as a general rule, children in the ancient world stay with their mom, nursing for up to 3 years old. So she didn't nurse him for 6 months and then push him off to the palace. He was probably trained by then, and she'd go, okay, you take care of all that nasty stuff, and when he's done, bring him here. Okay. Yes, you got paid, so let's eat better. Okay. Now the second section of the text starts in verse 11. And this is where things, there's no record of his growing up years whatsoever, but we can assume some things from the story. Verse 11, one day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, seeing no one. He struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, behold, 2 Hebrews were struggling together, and he said to the man in the wrong, why do you strike your companion? He answered, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and thought, surely the thing is known. When Pharaoh heard about it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up to save them and watered their flock. When they came home to their father Reuel, he said, how is it that you have come home so soon today? They said, an Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and even drew water for us and watered the flock. He said to his daughters, where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him, that he may eat bread. And Moses was content to go with the man. And he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. She gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershon, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. We'll stop right there for a moment. I describe this section as somebody taking authority into his own hands. I told you during the introduction that the book of Exodus is about authority. It's a critical issue. And this is a perfect illustration of someone taking authority into their own hands. So when Moses walks up to the first situation, he's thinking, I'm a Hebrew. He knew that early on he was not an Egyptian. Even though he's all dressed up like one, he comes from the court of Pharaoh. He probably has on these really cool clothes and everything else, but he just takes authority into his own hand. There's a taskmaster out there beating up on a Hebrew slave, and he just looks this way, looks that way, and takes the guy out. I have no idea what that was all about. He buries him in the sand. Now, the guy who was being beaten sat there and watched the whole thing. What do you think's going to happen, buddy? He's going to keep it a secret? He would have gone home, you're not going to believe what happened today. He told his family about it, and his friends and everything else. So it's no big surprise he goes out the next day as if like nothing ever happened. It was my job to take care of that mess that was going on. And he sees two Hebrew slaves fussing with each other. Instantly makes a snap judgment. You're wrong, you're right, I'm on this guy's side over here, I'm going to fix this problem. And he gets it in, and the guy just looks him in the face and goes, who are you to judge over us? This is a classic story of people who step in with authority where their nose doesn't belong. What are you doing in this mess right here? Get out of here. No one says those words to him. I mean, the story's truncated for sure, but I can imagine people are thinking, why are you putting your nose into our business? Get out of here. It's an interesting story. I've sat in public restaurants and watched people on one side of the counter have a serious issue with someone on the other side of the counter. Man, that guy's completely out of line. I would never walk up there and tell him, break them apart and start giving one person my own thoughts on the subject. I would never do something like that. Moses had no problems at all. I have the authority, you listen to me, otherwise you're dead. Or whatever he was thinking. It's a curious story to me. This is a man who thinks he has authority. He doesn't have any authority. But he functions like he has authority. So let's just talk about that for a few minutes. The Hebrew term translated grown up means that he had reached the age of 40. It's very likely that, and Acts chapter 7 in Stephen's speech, he identifies Moses as 40 years old when he actually gets involved in this skirmish. So this is not just a 19-year-old kid who thinks he knows everything. This is a 40-year-old man who's out of control. He thinks he's in charge because of his position as a member of Pharaoh's household. He was educated, well cared for, the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter. She named him, and he would have been known in and around the ruling family. He had a semblance of authority simply because he was from Pharaoh's household. But he knew he was not an Egyptian. He was a Hebrew, one of his people, verse 11. There's an interesting thing at the end of the story. Pharaoh is after him instantly. He hears about this, and there's no inquiry. He must have thought, you know what? Never should have brought this man in our house. He starts to hunt him down. There's a hunting party out for him immediately. And he says, I got to get out of this country, so he leaves. The whole story goes quite quickly. He goes through the land bridge on the northeast side of Egypt over into the Sinai wilderness, and he's sitting out by a well. Let's talk about this Midianite guy for a minute. Reuel has the name Jethro in Moses' story and the name Hobab. So there's a bit of a discussion about who all these people are, but I won't get into that. But he sits down by a well. Are well stories common in the book of Genesis? Guess what? Here we go again. Where did Isaac's wife come from? An encounter with his dad's servant at a well. Where did Jacob meet his wife? At a well. Where does Moses meet his wife? He was one of the 7 girls up there, Zipporah. At a well. I don't know if there's any truth in there. Unless you're looking for a wife, just go to a well somewhere. Meet somebody. The third story about Moses taking matters into his own hands, because once again, he comes to the well. He hasn't learned his lesson. What does he do when he gets to the well? He instantly picks the girls' sides. He runs those guys out of there. Of course, they're all like real happy. Go home and tell Dad all about, well, where is he? Bring him home. There's no men around here, so we need some help. So the third story plays itself out pretty nicely. But this is still 3 stories where the person who sticks his nose in is out of control. We can justify him in the third story, but in the end, it's a person who does not clearly understand authority. He really doesn't. Let's draw some observations, okay? The Midianites were distant relatives of God's people. By the way, when Abraham's wife Sarah died, he married a woman named Keturah, and she had 6 boys by him. He's like 160. And he sent all of them off. One of them was named Midian. He's the father of all the Midianites. Who was the tribe of people who actually purchased Joseph from his 10 older mean-spirited brothers? The Midianites. And now, who's going to take care of Moses for the next 40 years? A man who's a priest in Midian named Reuel, or Jethro. So Midian plays a role in God's plans. But they are distant relatives. By the way, Gideon defeated the Midianites in the book of Judges, I think chapter 10. So that they always kind of lurk around the perimeter of Israel's life. Some observations. Responding to life can be a challenge, but there are responses that bless the future and others that curse it. When Moses walked up to the first circumstance, his choice cursed the future. You can't just kill somebody and get away with it. He actually goes to the mountain, and what's the first commandment after honor your father and mother? Thou shalt not. The second thing in the list that I see, abuse of authority is a subtopic, and Moses is involved. There is an expectation that someone who does not know the Lord may or will gravitate towards abuse, only because they don't understand God's structure of authority, especially when that person is in a position of authority. But the other is also true. There is the expectation that if a person is a believer, that abuse will not be part of their daily life. They will process through the ideas and the issues of authority in God's Word, and they won't be abusive. And yet that's not the case, is it? That's because the world that we live in has an idea about authority, and then there's God's Word's idea about authority. And they don't mesh very well. Moses grew up in the court of Pharaoh, and at that time they were the rulers of the known Middle Eastern world. And their idea about authority was the Pharaoh's a god. You need to worship this man, and all authority flowed from him. But the truth of the matter is that's just not true. God's the ultimate authority in the universe, and He gives everyone else the authority that they have. And when He decides to take it away, it's gone. Now you may function like you still have power, but you don't really have any authority. You're just using your position of authority with power that you really don't have. And we'll see that play itself out in the Moses story over and over. Moses has been identified as the future leader of God's people, but he is not skilled at exercising authority. Most people who are in positions of authority got there by appointment. But do they have skill at exercising it? That depends a great deal. Next week we're going to talk about Moses' encounter with God, and I think, and it's my favorite Old Testament message at the moment, where God reveals Himself to Moses, and Moses sees a perfect picture of godly authority. God's authority. And you and I, internally, evaluate people in authority over us through the grid of that story, whether we know it or not. I know that I do. So we'll talk about that next week. Don't miss. The abuse of authority is devastating and always leaves scars on people. Dads can abuse their authority. Employers can abuse their authority. Government officials can abuse their authority. Church leadership can abuse their authority. It always leaves scars on people. And the longer the abuse lasts, the deeper the scars. Abuse of authority has no understanding of authority and its related power. talk about that next week in depth. With authority comes power. You can do things that other people can't do. And when we don't understand authority, we use our power. I was on city council many years ago in Southern California, and I had been on city council for three and a half years. I was running for re-election. And I walked into the office, and the secretary's name was Nancy, and I said to Nancy, you know, Nancy, I was thinking about this idea, and I kind of explained this whole thing. She says, why are you talking to me about it? I said, well, you're the secretary. I need a little help. She goes, you have authority to do that all by yourself. You don't need my permission. I didn't realize, she's looking at me like, what? Just do it. You have the authority to do this. I didn't realize I had that much power to just do this. All by myself. I didn't need permission from anybody. I didn't need a vote from the city council. I could just do it. Most people walk in there and just take over matters and do stuff and then discover later, you don't have power to do that kind of stuff. She was looking at me puzzled like, what kind of a person are you anyway? You're not on the city council. You can do this whatever you want. I didn't realize that. Only because my vantage point was completely the opposite of most people who walk into that position. I served with people on the city council who just took matters into their own hands all the time and just, what are you doing? You don't have authority to do this or power. But they thought they did. So it's really a mix of things. Moses took matters into his own hands at the beginning of his career from 40 till 80, until God met him in the wilderness. Let's close out. That's Moses. That's the first section. Let's look at the last few verses. Verse 23. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue and slavery came up to God. God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. The author of Moses transitions from his story to the story of God's people. So these are the next two sections. They're deeply woven together. God's people and God's leader, Moses. This is the transition paragraph. This ends the introduction to the book, basically. So let's have a real quick look at that thing. There are 5 statements in there. First, the Pharaoh that was alive when Moses killed that man is now dead. Okay, maybe you can go back to the country. Secondly, the new Pharaoh has the same exact mindset the previous one did, and he still has God's people enslaved. Nothing has changed in regards to authority structures in Egypt. Third, Israel begins to cry and pray to God for relief. That's the first time that those words are said in this text. Fourth, we learn that God remembers his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's the first time in the book of Genesis the word covenant, or berith in the Hebrew language, occurred 25 times. In the book of Exodus, this is the first time it's used. God remembers his covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm going to stop this for a minute. Everything I believe is based on a single, immutable fact. God does not go back on his promises. Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. And that translates to living with him for eternity. He's not going to change his mind. It's a permanent, in-stone promise. He will never reject his people. He remembered his promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob from Genesis chapter 15. He's not going to go back on his word. Everything I believe rests on that simple, immutable promise from God. And the fifth thing in the text, God saw and God knew what was going on, and it was time for him to step in and reveal himself. It indicates that what we see on earth is often distorted by our myopic view of life. God saw his people and knew them. What does God see right now in us? We see a small group of people. We see a church planted in a environment that's not like us? What does God see? And I would suggest to you that what he sees is something we don't see yet. And I want him to open our eyes to it. Let me draw some conclusions, okay? First, in Exodus 2, verses 11 through 15, we see a side of Moses that will appear again in his life with God. Anger and taking up for someone else. Moses stepped in where he was not invited, and even if he had been invited, he was not able to be neutral. This is an issue in his life, and he needs to see it and address it if he is going to succeed as a leader with God using him. Learning to appeal to people in authority is a skill that serves all people well, and if we do not learn that skill, we will face all sorts of life problems. Daniel learned this lesson amazingly in Daniel chapter 1. He learned how to appeal to people in authority over him. Moses was clueless about this whole concept. He just took matters into his own hands. That's what abusive authority does. It takes matters into its own hands and makes foolish choices. Anger and taking up offenses can be a real problem in the local church and reveals a lack of spiritual maturity. Let's talk about that for a minute. Number 2, Moses' anger is misguided even if it's not always wrong. It says in Ephesians chapter 4, should be 4 verse 26, not 6 verse 26. Be angry. Stop right there. There are things we should be angry about. And sin not. The first one says we ought to be angry about certain things, but we should never walk into sin as a response to that situation. Now, that's not the end of the verse. Listen to what it says. Be angry and sin not. And don't let the sun go down on your anger. Don't hang on to anger for a long time. Let it go. Release it. If it's sinful, you'll hang on to it way too long. That's not the end of the verse. Because when you do, you give place or opportunity to the devil. If you want Satan to ruin your life, hang on to anger. It's just permitting him. It's opening a door in your heart. Stick your foot right there, plant yourself in my life, and mess with me if you want. But I'm going to hang on to this anger. Moses makes some really bad choices. We'll learn about that because we'll jump out of Exodus a little bit to talk about some situations that come up in Moses' life. The devil got into the stories of Moses, fits of anger, and Moses was always punished for it. As a matter of fact, when Moses' anger gets the best of him at the worst time in his life, it's a spiritual abuse, and God punishes him royally. It's the worst punishment you could ever give somebody. I have a mission for you. You are not going to complete the mission. That's basically what God said. You will not complete this mission. It's my intention that you should, but you're not going to do it. I'm going to take you out before the time comes for you to complete this mission. I only give you 3 things on your list right there. I want to share a couple more that you can jot down. Moses' first 40 years of life and training ended in a wrong-headed idea about authority, a misguided choice that resulted in a dead man and life on the run. What did Moses do for 40 years in the wilderness? He was still the leader of 100 dumb sheep. That's what he did. He led sheep around the wilderness, the dumbest animals on earth, quote unquote. He must have thought to himself, what did I do to deserve this? This is miserable duty. I don't get to talk to anybody. I don't see humans for days. I have 100 dumb sheep following me around, looking for little blades of grass. He must have ground his mind must have ground over those foolish decisions he made back in Egypt. Man, I had nice clothes, I had a great place to stay, I had all these friends, been parties all the time, whatever else had you. And here I am in the backside of the desert for 40 years. Wow. God's doing, I'm getting you where I want you to be. been tough duty. Moses is both zealous and foolish. He's hot-headed and impulsive, cocksure, and a poor decision maker. He had learned these kinds of responses in the family of Pharaoh, likely in the mix of Egyptian leadership culture and training. He needed to learn that God can free his people just fine. He doesn't need Moses stepping in or sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. He's got some serious lessons to learn. In the two events where Moses stepped in, he displays courage and initiative, but with opposite results. First one, he killed somebody. The second one, he rescued 7 girls from abusive shepherds. Unlike Jesus, Moses struggled to understand authority. Jesus went into the temple and cleaned it out at least twice. He was never out of control. You got one more up here? It's coming?
Computer guy.
Okay. Here's something you can write down. The mistakes of our lives can be learning experiences if we are not willing to submit to the structures of authority that God established. In Scripture, there's 4 structures of authority. You already know this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The family, God set it up as a structure of authority. We may not like it, that's what God set it up to be. Number 2, the workplace. Scripture talks about employers and employees, masters and servants. It's a structure of authority. And God expects us to function underneath that. The 3rd structure of authority is local government. There's federal government, there's state government, there's county government, there's local government. There's the police officer. That's a structure of authority that God has put in the world. That was placed in the world after the flood. And the 4th structure of authority is the church. There's people who lead the church, and there's parishioners and stuff like that. So those are the 4 structures. And here's what I want you to hear. God always works through structures of authority. Can I trust that God can change my situation, my setting, my circumstances through the structures of authority that are around me? And the answer is an absolute yes. When we battle against the structures of authority that God's put in our life, He just stands on the sideline and watches us create a bigger and bigger mess. There's too many stories in Scripture that state that God works through structures of authority. Moses needs to learn that. So does Pharaoh, by the way, and he learns it. He has the worst lesson of all history in regards to making foolish decisions and not listening to God's ways of doing things. So, I don't know what that blank is on that text that you have right there. I'll find it. Here it is. Yeah, God works through structures of authority. That's what goes in that blank on your movie thing. One last thing, and then I'll quit. There's an allusion in this story that connects Moses with Jacob, the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. Moses takes up that role in time, and the events at the end of chapter 2 point to that role, even if Moses is completely unaware of it. Like Genesis 29, verses 9 and 10, Exodus 2, verses 15 to 22 presents us with a similar situation, and Moses steps into the role of Israel's new spiritual father. Jacob was the spiritual father of Israel, the 12 tribes. Moses steps into that role in the story. Like Jacob, Moses fled his home because of conflict. Like Jacob, Moses came to a well, encounters female shepherds, assists with their problems, waters their sheep, and is taken into their father's home, only to work for him and marry into his family. The stories are so similar in that regard. However, unlike Jacob, who led his family into Egypt, Moses is going to lead them out of Egypt. So the story switches, and we go from Jacob to Moses. Let's pray. Father, there's a lot of stuff in here, but the principle that laces the scriptures of Exodus is this whole issue of authority. And next week we're going to meet the ultimate authority in the universe as Moses encounters you at the burning bush. I pray, Lord, as we think about these topics this week, as we consider the mystery of authority in the universe, that you really run the whole thing. Every molecule follows your specific design directions. Every subatomic particle functions according to your perfect will. It's just us humans that are messed up so often. I pray, Lord, that as we function this week, that our hearts will be attuned to the structures of authority that you put in our lives, that you will speak to us about them when our heart pushes against them, and to just claim the simple fact that you work to those structures for our good. As Paul writes in Romans chapter 13, for our edification. I pray, Lord, that the way we use our authority this week will point people to Jesus.